I learned something about the human mind long before anyone around me realized it. You can escape places, you can escape people, you can even escape entire lives you once believed were permanent. But there is one thing you never escape: your own mind. Most people don't notice this because they spend their entire lives running from it. They drown it in noise, routine, distractions, obligations, conversations that never go deep enough to threaten their comfort. They stay busy, not productive. Busy. Because the moment silence appears, the moment nothing is demanding their attention, the moment the world stops talking for just a second, something else begins. The mind wakes up, and most people are terrified of what lies there. I wasn't given the luxury of avoiding it. At some point, I don't even remember when, the silence stayed long enough for me to hear everything inside it. The thoughts that most people push away before they form. The observations most people pretend not to notice. The quiet realizations that slip through the cracks of everyday life and whisper things most people aren't built to process. Once you hear those things clearly, something changes. Your mind stops being a background process. It becomes the entire landscape. You begin to notice patterns others ignore. You begin to see motivations behind actions people insist are innocent. You begin to recognize the difference between what people say and what they mean. And once you see that difference clearly enough, you can't unsee it. That's the beginning of a particular kind of isolation. Not loneliness, isolation. Because loneliness implies you want people around you. Isolation is what happens when you realize most people can't exist where your mind naturally lives. Most people move through life on the surface of things. Conversations are simple, emotions are predictable, motivations are obvious. They treat reality like something flat, something you can walk across without worrying about what might exist underneath. But there are layers beneath everything. And once your mind starts seeing those layers, the surface becomes impossible to return to. You begin noticing the hesitation in someone's voice before they lie. You begin noticing the way people shape their personalities depending on who is watching. You begin noticing the tiny fractures in the masks everyone wears, not in a dramatic way, quietly, consistently, relentlessly. It's not something you turn on, it's something that stays on. And that's when the real problem begins. Because the more clearly you see others, the more clearly you begin to see yourself. And that is where most people turn away. But some of us don't. Some of us keep looking. I kept looking. I examined every thought that crossed my mind, every reaction I had, every moment where emotion tried to take control of my reasoning. I watched my own patterns the same way I watched everyone else's. And the deeper I looked, the more I realized something most people never want to admit. Your mind is not entirely your ally. There are parts of it that protect you. But there are also parts of it that quietly sabotage you. Parts of it that replay memories long after they stop being useful. Parts of it that notice threats even when none exist. Parts of it that remember every mistake you've ever made with perfect clarity, while conveniently forgetting everything you survived. Your mind keeps records, not balanced ones, precise ones. And the longer you live with that awareness, the more you realize something unsettling. Your greatest strength and your greatest prison are the same thing: your ability to think deeply. People praise intelligence. People admire perception. People romanticize depth. But they rarely talk about the cost. Because when your mind operates at a certain level of awareness, it never really rests. It analyzes, it predicts, it questions. Even when you wish it wouldn't. You lie in bed at night and your body wants sleep, but your mind begins reconstructing conversations that happened weeks ago. You remember things people said that didn't make sense at the time, but suddenly reveal a different meaning. You replay moments where your instincts warned you about something you ignored. And every time that happens, your mind quietly reminds you of something else. You should have known. That phrase becomes familiar. You should have known. You should have noticed. You should have understood sooner. And slowly, without realizing it, You start holding yourself to a level of awareness that no human being can realistically maintain every second of their life. But your mind doesn't care about realistic expectations. It cares about patterns, and patterns are relentless. Once your brain learns to identify them, it keeps looking for them everywhere, in people, in behavior, in conversations, in silence. You start noticing how often people contradict themselves, how often they change their values depending on what benefits them, how often they say they want honesty but become uncomfortable the moment honesty appears. You start noticing how many people prefer comfortable illusions over uncomfortable truths. And eventually, something inside you shifts. You stop expecting understanding. You stop explaining certain thoughts. You stop sharing certain realizations, not because you want to isolate yourself, but because you've learned something about human nature. Most people don't want depth. They want the appearance of depth. They want conversations that sound meaningful without actually requiring them to question anything about themselves. But real awareness doesn't work like that. Real awareness is invasive. It dismantles assumptions. It exposes contradictions. It forces you to question motivations, not just in others, but in yourself. And that's where things become dangerous. Because when you start questioning yourself with the same intensity you question the world, you discover parts of your mind that aren't easy to accept, impulses you didn't realize you had, fears you thought you had overcome, emotions you thought you had buried. You begin to understand that your personality is not as simple as you once believed. There are layers within layers, conflicts within conflicts. And sometimes the person you think you are is only the part of you that's easiest to live with. The rest stays hidden in the background of your mind, observing, waiting, influencing decisions in ways you don't always recognize. Most people never explore that territory. They live their entire lives within the version of themselves that feels stable and socially acceptable. But once you've seen the deeper layers of your mind, you can't pretend they don't exist. You start realizing how thin the line is between control and chaos. How easily a different set of experiences could have turned you into someone completely unrecognizable. How many of your beliefs are shaped by circumstances you never chose. And the deeper that realization goes, the quieter you become, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're thinking about things most conversations aren't built to handle. You begin to notice how fragile certainty really is, how easily confidence collapses under the weight of enough questions. How many people rely on rigid beliefs not because they're correct, but because uncertainty terrifies them. But when your mind becomes comfortable with uncertainty, a strange thing happens. You stop looking for easy answers. You start looking for accurate ones. And accurate answers are rarely comforting. They reveal complexities people would rather avoid. They show you how often emotions override logic. They show you how easily manipulation hides inside ordinary behavior. They show you how frequently people convince themselves of things simply because the alternative would require them to change. But perhaps the most unsettling realization is this: the mind that sees everything clearly also sees its own darkness. And darkness doesn't always mean cruelty. Sometimes it means capacity, the capacity for anger, the capacity for destruction, the capacity for decisions that could change everything if they were ever allowed to surface without restraint. Most people believe they are good because they have never been forced to confront what they are capable of. But awareness removes that illusion. You begin to understand that morality is not something you are born with. It's something you choose repeatedly. Every day, every decision, every reaction, because the potential for something darker always exists beneath the surface. And acknowledging that potential doesn't make you dangerous. Ignoring it does. That's something very few people are willing to accept. They prefer to believe that good and evil are simple categories that exist outside themselves. But the truth is far less comfortable. Both live inside every mind, including yours, including mine, and the difference between them is not identity. It's restraint. Restraint built from awareness. Restraint built from understanding consequences. Restraint built from recognizing how easily power, emotional, psychological, social, can be misused if it's never questioned. That realization changes the way you see people, not with contempt, not with superiority, but with clarity. You begin to understand that everyone is navigating their own internal maze of fears, desires, memories, and instincts. Some people are aware of that maze. Most are not, and awareness creates distance. Because once you see the maze clearly, you realize how many people are still wandering through it blindly. You watch them repeat the same mistakes, trust the same manipulations, chase the same empty validations, and sometimes you want to warn them. And sometimes you want to explain everything you've learned about human behavior and perception and self-deception. But experience teaches you something important. People rarely accept truths they didn't discover themselves. So you stop trying to force awareness on anyone. You simply observe, you listen more than you speak. You watch how people respond to pressure, to silence, to honesty. And slowly you begin to understand something that changes everything. The most powerful position in any interaction is not control. It's understanding. Because when you understand how people think, you understand how they move. When you understand how they move, you understand how they decide. And when you understand how they decide, you understand what they fear. Fear is the foundation of most human behavior. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of insignificance, fear of being seen too clearly. And that last fear is the one people hide the most carefully, because being seen clearly removes the ability to pretend. It removes the comfort of misunderstanding. It exposes the truth beneath the performance. That's why most people are careful about who they reveal themselves to. Because the moment someone truly understands you, they gain a kind of power over you. Not through manipulation, through knowledge. And knowledge changes dynamics in ways people don't always realize. That's why the mind that sees too much becomes cautious. It learns to watch before it speaks, to listen before it reveals, to understand before it trusts, not out of paranoia, but out of experience. Because once you understand how easily perception shapes reality, you become careful about who you allow to perceive you fully. That's the paradox of awareness. The more clearly you see the world, the more carefully you allow the world to see you. And somewhere inside that balance, your mind becomes something different. Not just a place where thoughts happen, but a place where everything is examined, everything is questioned, everything is understood before it's believed. That kind of mind is powerful, but it's also something else. A place you can never escape, because once awareness reaches a certain depth, there is no returning to the surface, only moving forward, deeper into the architecture of thought, deeper into the patterns of behavior, deeper into the quiet realization that the greatest mystery you will ever explore is the one inside your own mind. And the deeper you go, the more you begin to understand something unsettling. Your mind is not just observing the world, it is slowly rewriting the way you exist within it. And that transformation has only just begun. Silence is not what most people think it is. To them, silence is the absence of noise, a break between conversations, an empty space waiting to be filled. But real silence, the kind that exists when the world finally stops interrupting you, is something else entirely. It's a battlefield, because the moment the noise disappears, something far more powerful begins to speak. Your mind. Most people never stay in silence long enough to hear it clearly. They reach for their phones, turn on music, start conversations, open distractions the moment the quiet begins pressing in. They call it boredom. But it isn't boredom, it's avoidance. Avoidance of the one place they can't control with external noise, the space inside their own thoughts. That's where the war lives. And once you've heard it clearly, you realize something most people never discover. Your mind doesn't speak with one voice. It speaks with many. There is the voice that wants control, the voice that wants safety, the voice that wants power, the voice that wants peace. And sometimes those voices do not agree. Most people simplify their identity into something comfortable. They say things like, "This is who I am," but that statement is rarely accurate. Because the truth is far more complicated. You are not one fixed self. You are a negotiation between multiple parts of your own mind, parts that want different things, parts that react differently to the same situation, parts that remember experiences in ways that shape your decisions long after the moment has passed. And silence is where those parts begin to argue. You notice it the first time when you're alone long enough for your thoughts to stop performing for anyone else. The voice of logic appears first, calm, measured, observing everything like an analyst reviewing patterns. But it's never alone. Emotion arrives soon after. Not the dramatic kind people display in public, but the deeper one. The one that remembers every slight, every betrayal, every moment you swallowed a reaction because the situation demanded restraint. Emotion does not forget. Even when you pretend it has, then there is instinct, quiet, fast. The part of your mind that notices danger before logic has time to process it. The part that feels something is wrong long before evidence appears. And somewhere beneath all of that, there is awareness. Awareness does not argue, it watches. It observes the entire conversation happening inside you like a silent witness sitting at the edge of the battlefield. Most people try to silence that battlefield. They pick one voice, usually the one that makes them feel the most comfortable, and they pretend the others don't exist, but pretending doesn't make them disappear. It only makes them quieter, and quiet things have a habit of growing stronger in the dark. That's why some people eventually reach a moment where their own mind surprises them, a reaction they didn't expect. A thought that doesn't match the identity they built for themselves, an impulse that reveals something about their nature they would rather ignore. They call those moments mistakes, but they're not mistakes, they're glimpses. Glimpses of the parts of themselves they never allowed to speak. Once you become aware of that internal war, you stop pretending your mind is simple. You begin to listen more carefully. You notice how different situations awaken different versions of you. The calm version, the calculating version, the protective version, the one capable of kindness, and the one capable of something far less gentle. Most people insist those darker capacities don't belong to them. They insist they would never be capable of cruelty, manipulation, or destruction. But awareness teaches you something uncomfortable. The capacity for darkness exists in everyone, not because people are evil, but because survival itself requires certain instincts that are not always gentle. The instinct to protect. The instinct to dominate when threatened. The instinct to eliminate danger before it eliminates you. Civilization teaches us to control those instincts. But control is not the same as absence. They are still there waiting, observing, responding when the right circumstances appear, and silence is where you begin to see them clearly. The first time you notice it, it feels unsettling. You realize your mind can imagine scenarios you would never act on. You realize your thoughts sometimes move into territories that conflict with the identity you present to the world. And the natural reaction is denial. That's not really me. But the more honest reaction is different. That is a part of me I choose not to become. That distinction matters. Because denying parts of your mind leaves them unexamined. And unexamined things are unpredictable. But when you acknowledge them, when you look directly at the full range of your own capacity, something strange happens. You gain control, real control, not the fragile kind built on pretending you are always calm or always rational or always good, but the kind built on understanding exactly what you are capable of and choosing your actions carefully because of that knowledge. That's what awareness actually gives you, not purity, clarity. Clarity about your own nature, clarity about human behavior, clarity about the invisible forces that shape decisions long before logic enters the conversation. And once you have that clarity, the world begins to look different. You start noticing the wars happening inside other people. The tension in their voices when emotion clashes with pride. the hesitation when instinct warns them not to trust someone, the quiet frustration when their internal conflicts surface in ways they cannot easily explain. You begin to see that everyone is fighting something internally. Some people fight their fears, some fight their anger, some fight their desire to be someone completely different from the person they have been forced to become. But most people never acknowledge those internal battles openly. They hide them behind roles, professional roles, social roles, personal identities carefully constructed to look stable from the outside, because stability is what the world rewards, the appearance of certainty, the appearance of control, the appearance of having everything figured out. But appearances are fragile things, and silence is where they crack. Because when someone finally sits alone with their thoughts long enough, the truth eventually surfaces. Questions begin appearing. Why did I react that way? Why do certain memories still affect me? Why do I feel something I cannot explain when I'm around certain people? Those questions are the beginning of self-awareness, but they're also the beginning of something more difficult. Responsibility. Because once you see the internal forces shaping your decisions, you can no longer pretend they aren't influencing your life. You can no longer blame everything on circumstances. You have to acknowledge the role your own mind plays in the outcomes you experience. That realization can feel heavy, sometimes even overwhelming, because it means your future is not simply something that happens to you. It's something you shape with every thought you allow to guide your actions, every belief you decide to keep, every fear you decide to confront or avoid. Your mind is not just a place where thoughts appear. It's a system constantly rewriting your identity, and silence is where that rewriting becomes visible. You begin to see patterns. The way certain thoughts repeat themselves, the way certain emotions resurface in similar situations, the way certain beliefs guide your decisions even when you're not consciously aware of them. Those patterns are the architecture of your mind, the blueprint of how you exist in the world. Most people never study that architecture. They live inside it without examining it. But awareness turns you into something different. An observer of your own design. You begin noticing the walls you built to protect yourself, the habits you formed to avoid pain, the behaviors you developed to survive situations you never expected to face. And sometimes you discover parts of yourself that were never built intentionally at all. They were built by circumstances, by experiences that shaped you before you understood what they were doing. And once you see that, you face a choice. You can continue living inside the architecture exactly as it is, or you can begin rebuilding it, rebuilding the beliefs that limit you, rebuilding the reactions that no longer serve you, rebuilding the parts of your mind that were shaped by fear instead of clarity. But rebuilding yourself is not a peaceful process. It's a war. Because every belief you question will resist change. Every habit you challenge will try to pull you back into familiarity. Every part of your mind that grew comfortable with the old structure will fight to preserve it. Your mind values stability more than truth. It prefers the known, even when the known is flawed. That's why transformation feels uncomfortable. Because you're not just changing behavior, you're rewriting the system that produced it. And systems resist being rewritten. But if you persist, something remarkable begins to happen. The battlefield inside your silence becomes quieter. Not because the voices disappear, but because they begin to understand each other. Logic learns to listen to instinct. Emotion learns to communicate with awareness. Instinct learns to respect restraint. The war does not end, but it becomes organized, intentional, directed toward growth instead of chaos. And that's when silence stops feeling like a battlefield. It becomes something else, a command center, a place where every part of your mind contributes to a clearer understanding of reality. A place where decisions come from awareness instead of reaction. A place where your identity is no longer something that happened to you, but something you deliberately create. Very few people reach that point. Not because it's impossible, but because it requires something most people avoid: honesty with yourself. Brutal honesty, the kind that forces you to see your flaws without excuses. The kind that demands responsibility for the ways your own thinking has shaped your life. But that honesty also gives you something rare. Freedom from illusions, freedom from unconscious patterns, your freedom from the invisible forces that control people who never stop long enough to question their own mind. And once you taste that freedom, something inside you changes permanently. You stop fearing silence, you start seeking it. Because silence is no longer empty. It's where the deepest truths about who you are finally become visible. And the more clearly you see those truths, the more powerful your mind becomes. But power always comes with a cost, because the deeper your awareness grows, the harder it becomes to ignore the truth about the world around you,